Some gun makers have an undeniable legacy and an unrivaled reputation for both shootability and reliability. Krieghoff is one of those gun makers.
Krieghoff make their barrels unlike anybody I've seen yet.
And today, we're going to be delving into the place where these legends are born.
Welcome to the Krieghoff Factory. This is the first thing they showed us this morning and I'm absolutely mind blown.
This time, I'm not alone. I brought a guy who is very familiar with Krieghoff to show me around.
Hello. What? I thought you were going to say something else.
We checked out every aspect of gun making here.
Engraving is such a subjective thing, isn't it?
Absolutely it is.
The machine shop.
This is where they do the silver soldering. Let's take a look.
Hand assembly. Engraving.
I think you'll struggle to go and find anything better looking than that in my eyes.
Stock making. And even the apprentice program. We even took them for a test on both clays and an amazing duck day.
Give them a test run.
This shooting ground didn't seem much on the outside, but we walked in, it's...
But that's for another time. Let's get into the factory.
Ed Solomon's.
Welcome to Krieghoff.
I'm really excited.
You're going to have a fantastic couple of days, mate.
You've been here before?
Many times, yeah. I haven't been since pre-COVID, so this is like coming home. Really looking forward to it.
What can we expect?
Fantastic group of people, some incredible hand finishing and hand work. Just going to be something a little bit different. I don't think it's going to be like anything you've seen before, so really looking forward to it.
You've used a K80 for years.
Over 20 years now. I think probably 20, close to 25, not quite 25.
You obviously like them.
Yeah, strangely.
Strangely, yeah.
Fantastic guns, fantastic people. It's like being a member of a family. I think you're going to get that feeling as well. So let's go and have a look around.
I walked into that factory and was immediately fascinated by everything I saw. Let's start this tour with barrel production, based on the ground floor.
We are going to start with the barrels, mostly because these guys do their barrels differently to anyone else I've seen. They start with a hammer forged tube that they buy into the higher standard, built to their spec. And instead of sticking them together like we've seen before, they stick them together like this. The tubes start life as a cold hammer forged tube made to their specification. Usually what you do then is take a monoblock, stick the tubes in, and then weld top ribs or solder top ribs, mid ribs and bits on. These guys do it very differently. What they do is they stick the top rib on first. And I know that's not like a massive difference, but it's enough that it's got my poor little brain confused. Because what these guys do is stick a top rib on and then machine the top rib to spec. And we are going to look through that entire process right now. The monoblock starts life as bar stock and is all machined into shape. Whether that's a high rib, a raised rib, it will all come as they need. What's really quite cool is if you look at the front here, those holes are filled with 2 bars of solder and 2 holes are cut through the action. And that allows, when this is heated up, that solder to go all the way around the barrels and lock them in perfectly. Soldering is the process of using a low temperature melting point alloy to join 2 higher temperature melting point metals. In this case, they're going to be using silver solder to stick 2 steel tubes together. A lot of makers use soft lead solder. It's a much lower temperature melting point, and it is great. But silver solder is harder to do, but it's also much harder wearing and creates a much stronger bond. These guys do still use soft lead soldering, but only on their small gauge guns and only to connect the ribs at the front. This is where they do the silver soldering. Let's take a look. I was told off when I first came in here, this is a clean room. All the metal parts in here are completely clean, and that is so that the soldering process has no imperfections in it. This dude here is actually induction heating up all the metal parts. And what that does when it gets up to 700 degrees Celsius or about 1300 Fahrenheit is melt those silver solder sticks and fill the holes perfectly in the monoblock to the barrels. Thereafter, he actually goes around the metal rod just to make sure every hole is perfectly filled, creating the strongest possible bond from the tubes to the monoblock.
Next, it was time to see some ribs get laid on a small gauge set of barrels. These are soft soldered, not hard soldered, but it's still a cool process to watch.
The K80 runs on a barrel hanger system. So what that means is it doesn't have a midrib. What that means is instead of having controlled deformation on these pipes, they're actually plumb straight. So this guy here, instead of actually deforming those barrels to make point of impact perfect, is actually straightening them. Obviously you can adjust point of impact by changing that bottom hanger, but these barrels are born dead straight. At this stage we have a barrel that is joined together, the rib is machined, the ejectors are fitted and the ejector rims are all reamed out. It's time to polish. Before they go into the polishing robot, they're actually hand polished. Just some of the high points that this robot can't hit are taken off, put on this rack, and then that robot will just feed and polish until they're in this state. It's not 100% finished yet. It has to go upstairs for some hand finishing, but that's a pretty good saving on man hours. Very efficient.
This is the barrel honing machine. Its job is to polish the internal bore of every gun barrel to a mirror finish, ensuring optimum performance and longevity in these non-chromed bores.
Here is where the ribs are machined, and this is the first thing they showed us this morning, and I'm absolutely mind blown. They add the tapers and the machining on after they've joined it to the barrel, and that's because the single rib they fit can turn into 2 or 3 different rib options. That is what it looks like post machining. At this point we have 2 tubes soldered into a monoblock, and it's time to machine this parallel rib here into what we would know as a K80 rib. It goes into this machine and that is done. All of the tapering, all the machining, the mid ribs, the ramp at the back, it's all done in one process. I mean, I've never seen anyone do it like that, but it does half work. All that's left to do now is to fit the ejectors. The ejector slot is machined into the top, the ejectors are hard fitted, and then the rim of the chamber is reamed out. Krieghoff buy in all of the common tools, but they actually custom make a lot of their specialty tools in-house. What I find really cool, it's complete aside, nothing to do with gun making, is that all of the tools are actually fitted into the chucks through heat. They heat up the base, they push fit the tool in, and then they super cool it with liquid nitrogen just to make sure it's a perfectly tight fit. It's then put into this machine just to make sure it's perfectly central. I just thought that was pretty cool. I like engineering and liquid nitrogen. This is a K80 action forging. It's a bit of metal forged and stamped out in the rough shape of a K80. What this does is make machining a little more efficient. It also means that the structure of the steel is in the right sort of shape to begin with. What happens, they take this and they put it in that massive robot CNC down there. That works 24 hours a day, turning these into these. This is clamped into the machine, and in about 60-65 minutes of machining time, it's rough machined out into this. This still has a rough bottom and rough side, so the machining isn't finished. What happens is it's then clamped into the machine this way, 3 of them in a set, and the bottom is machined off. From here, it's time for hand finishing, engraving, and assembly. This is one of the most important jobs in the place. This is quality control. A different number of every parts every day come in here. The more expensive and more important the part, the more quality control checks per day are done. You're looking at about, that's 4 actions a day. Go through this machine to make sure those machines are running in tolerance. Tolerance is 5 microns. 5 microns is 1/200th of a millimeter. 1/200th of a millimeter. That's pretty precise engineering. What that allows is for actions and barrels that just clip together with very little work to get them together. Some other gun makers require a lot of blacking, a lot of fitting, and there's nothing wrong with that. But for guns that use multi-barrel sets, this level of engineering is kind of necessary. 1/200th of a millimeter is pretty wild. Most gun makers are working to very tight tolerances, but 5 microns is fairly tight.
As you'd expect, all of the parts of a Krieghoff undergo a lot of handwork, which starts with hand and machine polishing of all the actions and barrel sets.
Welcome upstairs to the polishing room. We saw downstairs how 80% of it is done by machine. Up here, everything is finished by hand on an array of wheels and belts. It's worth mentioning, seeing as I'm surrounded by buckets of gun, that all actions and all barrels are built independently of each other until quite late in the process. Most other gun makers will have had a serialized barrel that will belong to this action by now. All actions are built and regulated with a slave set of barrels, and all barrels are built and regulated to a slave action, meaning that all the actions are built to a perfect tolerance barrel, and all barrels are built to a perfect tolerance action, which means theoretically they're all ultimately interchangeable. Theoretically. It's pretty cool. I mean, it's not like wildly exciting, but it is the Krieghoff way, and hey, it's nice to see someone do something differently.
The K80 action is legendary for its reliability and strength. The internal design is pretty awesome, as well as being unlike any other gun on the market. The unique layout, akin to a traditional box lock design, mixed with expert finishing, regulation and assembly, ensures the best trigger pulls and consistent functioning for years to come. If you're into any kind of engineering, you can't be mad at this action.
Welcome to the first half of the K80 production line. It's actually split between this side of the building and that side, with a few storage rooms in the middle. Starts life with a trigger unit being built. The K80 trigger unit is probably more complex than most other shotguns out there, but it's also, well, it's unique, isn't it? It's really quite cool because it has the selector actually as part of the trigger blade. Next, the barrels are joined to the action and the ejector timing is done. And that's all done at this bench here and that bench there. Many multi-barrel sets, so it can be a slightly more complicated process than others. And where the ejector system is slightly more complicated than others, when you've got these little double spring plunger jobs, it can take a little bit more time than others. But you know, this is a premium product. If you discount all of the time in the machine shop and just include man hours in terms of fitting on a machine engraved gun, you're looking at 2.5 weeks of total man hours. If you started today, it'd be done in 2.5 weeks. Obviously, a gun's not finished in 2.5 weeks. There's waiting times, you're doing them in batches, and so that's ideal world stuff. But that's just a concept of how much time actually goes into one of these. It is a premium product. There are a lot of parts, and every single one needs to be hand fitted, hand regulated, and double checked that it's actually being built to the right standard. That's actually all done right next door until it comes back in here to see this guy. This guy is the final finisher, the assembler. He's double checking that everyone has done their jobs. The trigger brakes are good, the ejection timing is good, all the wood finish is good, and more importantly, the gun actually matches what the job sheet says. After that, goes in a brown box, gets sent all over the world for people to go and use.
All of the blacking happens in-house at Krieghoff, using traditional hot salt black. Barrels are washed and degreased before being put into a sequence of baths, filled with boiling blacking salts, after which they're washed off and left to dry and harden. This method's been used for decades, but if it ain't broke, don't fix it. A gun can be as practical and as shootable as can be, but without some adornment on the action, many of us wouldn't give it a sideways glance. Krieghoff offer an extensive array of machine engraved guns, but I wanted to visit the engraver's studio to see how their best guns are created.
Like, engraving is such a subjective thing, isn't it?
Absolutely it is. If you ask 10 people what their kind of thing is, you'll get 10 different answers. This is a very good example of something that I think would polarize opinion.
Oh yeah.
I absolutely love this real heavy, deep relief, kind of German style engraving, right?
There's a lot about the Krieghoff action that just lends itself to big scenes, and
Yeah.
you've got to admire that, right?
It's a big piece of metal. It's got a lot of surface area, and I think it suits this real sort of strong.
The fine scroll, big, bold, carved acabas. It's about as technically competent as you could make engraving.
And the closer you get to this and the more you see it in the light, the more you can appreciate just how much work has gone into it, right?
And Krieghoffs are divided into laser range and hand range.
Yeah, so a lot of the sort of base models, so your Arabesque Scroll, Sovereign, Eleganza and the Symphony would all be laser cut, and that gives you a really, really nice looking action, but it keeps the price point
Very
manageable.
affordable by comparison to something like that.
If you had the same pattern cut by hand, it would be like crazy expensive.
Yeah, and they're not characterful enough to warrant being done by hand.
No, precisely. It's something that does a job and it looks very good, but something like this, which is obviously like a one-off custom piece, this has to be done by hand.
That's
and
like
you can see the work.
60, 70 grand?
I think approximately 60,000 euros, I think is what Ralph said. So it's a pretty serious chunk of change, but you can see where the work's gone into it, right?
Yeah, right. And I think some people appreciate engraving and some people don't. A bit like wood. Some people would want nicer wood on there. Some people would be very happy with that, which is a lovely piece of wood.
Yeah, look, it's taste at the end of the day. And I know people say that they're tools and they should just be there to do a job. But my view is if you have a tool that looks cool, why would you not?
Look, a house is a place to live, but you wouldn't say no to a mansion, would you?
Exactly. Very good analogy.
It is art, and I think at this level it's just...
Yeah, you know it's not going to make you
pretty
shoot any better, right? But if
Does
you're
it
going
not?
to miss, you're going to look good
You're
missing.
wrong. Yeah, more gold makes you better, guaranteed.
It may have been the K80 that brought me here, but at every turn, my eyes have been grabbed by their other offerings.
Although today we'd be looking at shotguns predominantly, it would be wrong to come to Krieghoff and not look at some of their rifles. So I've got some in front of me. Let's start with this. This is a Semprio. It starts at 4,000 euros. It is an in-line repeater, meaning that, that's kind of self-explanatory, right? It has a box magazine. It is a true takedown, he says. Oh, that's pretty cool, right? Comes in a variety of calibers, and you don't have to have it in camo. It comes in lovely wood options, but that's more money. If you're into more traditional things and guns that you're allowed in the UK, we have the Hubertus. I'm a massive single shot fan. These start at around 5,000 euros. It's a bit more with an octagonal barrel, which, is significantly cooler. This is an unbelievably beautiful one, to be fair. And of course, like with anything, you're going to end up spending more money, because why wouldn't you want beautifully filed bits of metal, engraving and stunning wood? And that long safety tang, it's nice to have nice things, isn't it? However, if you want more than one shot, you have this, the Krieghoff Classic. Now you're up to about 8,000 euros starting price. And again, this one comes with a hell of a lot of extras, my favourite of which is this, a shell holder in the buttstock. Perhaps not the most practical way of having ammunition to relieve quickly, but it's just beautiful. And finally, something you don't see a lot of in the UK at least, a drilling. Again, starts at around 8,000 euros, 2 shotgun barrels and 1 rifle barrel underneath, with a little selector on the side. And of course, an absolutely sweet decocking system. But we're not really here to talk about rifles today. Let's look at some shotguns.
Learning to become a gunmaker is not a 5-minute task. And globally, gunmaking journeymen are in short supply. Krieghoff combat this shortage by running their own gunmaking apprenticeship program on the top floor of their factory.
Yeah, we're here in the apprentice department. We train here our young gunsmiths to get great gunsmiths for Krieghoff. We start the work in the first year with a basic metal training, where they learn to file, getting used to file, get a feeling for it, standing 8 hours a day on a vise.
Turning metal into small pieces of metal.
Away from the school bench. And from the second year on, they start working on real custom guns.
And it's a 3-year apprenticeship?
Yeah, it's a 3-year apprenticeship.
How many apprentices do you have?
So we have normally 2, sometimes 3 per year.
Okay.
So sometimes up to 9 young boys and girls getting trained here as gunsmiths.
Once you've decided on an action and barrel spec, it's time to choose some wood, and I certainly know what a big choice this is to make. Picking the perfect piece is seemingly impossible, as every one is beautiful in its own way. Like most gunmakers, Krieghoff have their own wood grading system that Ed took me through.
Ed, you're not an off-the-shelf kind of size and shape.
Yep. One presumes that all of your Krieghoffs are custom stocked.
Yes, all except my 20 gauge, which is just a time thing. I've got a standard left-handed stock, which is fine. One of the things that's fantastic about Krieghoff is the ability to come here to the factory, choose some wood and get a truly bespoke stock made by Ralph, and also get an opportunity to shoot it. So it's kind of like a 24, 48 hour process. Come to the factory, choose your blank, which we'll go through shortly, get measured up, stock gets headed up. The next day, bit of final fitting and off to MZSU, shoot the gun in test conditions. If there's any adaptations that need to be made, tweaks, sign the spec sheet off, and then a few weeks later, job done, oiled up and finished.
That's a pretty simple thing, and that doesn't come as standard though, right?
That doesn't come as standard. That is an option for people to do. So you can buy an off-the-peg gun, with standard dimensions, and there's various stock specs. So there's the parkour stock and the sporting stock and Monte Carlos for the higher ribbed guns, etc. But if someone like yourself, who is quite clearly outside of the normal measurement scale, it makes sense to come and pick something and get it made from scratch, because otherwise you're going to be fighting an uphill battle.
And as standard, it comes with something like that.
Yeah, so when you pay to have a custom stock done, there's a fixed price involved in the workload, and then the wood is an extra on top. So the price that you'll get quoted is for the work, and then you choose a quality of wood, and each quality of wood has a sort of corresponding price increase.
As it gets rarer and rarer.
Yeah, as it goes up the scale, the price, let's say, increases exponentially. So you've got something from what's in front of you there, which is a grade 0.
Yeah, it's kind of uninspiring, but it's nice enough.
Strong, straight grain, nothing overly exciting in it, and then you'll work up the grades.
Yeah, it's 500 odd pounds for that. I think that's a worthwhile upgrade.
Yeah,
right?
look, I mean, when you're looking at spending, so the UK market, you'd be looking at probably 13 to 14,000 pounds baseline for a standard K80, plus your custom stock option, plus coming over to Germany. You're not in it for a small amount of money. So my view is, if you're going to spend that kind of money, you may as well get something that looks pretty right. Yeah, so if it means an extra £500, yes, £500 is a lot of money, but relative to the total amount of cash that you're spending, it's kind of reasonably insignificant.
Kind of thing, right?
And if you look at the difference there, just between a grade 0 and a grade 1, or a grade 1 and a grade 2, that you can kind of see how much.
It's fairly simple, right?
Yeah, that's an easy decision to make. What's interesting as you go up the sort of the grades of wood is how Krieghoff categorise it, and you may find that going to a higher grade of wood doesn't necessarily appeal to what you sort of aesthetically like. So some of the stuff like if you use this as a really high-end example, this is a C2, so this is custom grade 2. This is almost as high it goes. You C3, which is pretty rare, is the top end. Now, this for me doesn't actually suit my taste at all. I prefer a lighter wood with sort of dark contrasting banding going through it. And you could compare this, which say is the C2, to a standard grade 4. Now, for me, I think that is much nicer, but it's very subjective and it's what you like. So I think it's interesting to be able to come here to the wood room and go through different blanks and basically pick what suits you, and you look at it and go, oh, okay, that's a C1, or that's a grade 3, that's a grade 4. And you could also say to the guys, I want to spend no more than this, which is going to be a certain grade of wood, and they can show you 5, 6, 7 different options, and then you can pick one that suits you the best.
Awesome, man. It is interesting. You've got that as a grade 1, which is stunning, and this is a grade 2, which obviously has a little more going on, but you're not being robbed at any level, right? It's such a personal preference thing.
If you ask me, I prefer the grain structure on the grade 1 to the grade 2. So in my mind, it doesn't matter which one they've categorised as 1 or 2. You look at it and go, which one do you prefer? I prefer this one. That's the one I want to go for. It happens to be cheaper, then happy days.
We all know that when you're in this situation, regardless of the grade, you find the one you want and you're going to make it work. But honestly, that grade 1's all right.
Yeah, you'd be more than happy with that, right?
Yeah.
When it comes to stock dimensions, broadly speaking, you have 3 options with Krieghoff. Option 1 is an off-the-shelf stock. Nothing wrong with this if you're an off-the-shelf person. Option 2 is a semi-custom stock, where Ralph, their legendary stocker, will adapt one of their pattern stocks with filler and spacers and then clone it onto your wood blank.
As you see, it's a parkour copy model.
Yep.
But it's a little bit modified, as I told you, the grip is
Extended
on
Yep.
the bottom, and we got more palm swell.
This certainly seems like the best route for 90% of people, as this method can get all of the important stuff bang on. Like perfect comb and cast adjustment, as well as extra grip length and palm swell. The third option is a full custom stock, where the only thing that's machined is the headwork.
If it's complete handmade, we just copy in this part.
So like the heading up
We're
piece.
just heading up
Yep.
the receiver.
And everything else is done the old-fashioned way with draw knives, files, chisels and paper. Whichever direction you go, Ralph's reputation precedes him as one of the best stock makers and fitters in the world. So listen to what he has to say and you won't go far wrong. One of the interesting parts that I learned from him was how he optimizes the use of a blank by making sure the headwork has perfect placement.
Just for example, I placed the blank. If you did not place it right like that and make the fixed point here and here, you had the problem, too less wood.
This method allows him to maximize the cast and drop a piece of wood has to offer.
You could angle that headwork to give you 10 or 15 millimeters
And
of
I
cast.
can angle for a stand-up, I place it like this. If you want to have it on a CNC machine and you fix it in a vise or you do it with a seam, you had to plan everything.
Okay, so everything has to be super flat, straight lines.
The time we need, I think personally, shorter. It's a little rougher than copied with a CNC machine, but we are flexible and I think I'm faster.
Krieghoff is clearly obsessed with the quality and longevity of every part of their guns.
Although, yeah.
Wow, that is bizarre.
Krieghoff make their stock bolt holes unlike any other maker.
Use the drill to mark. We drill not the direction, we just mark it for a few millimeters.
Using a system of marking jigs, pillar drills, drill clamps, and drill guides to create the perfect stock bolt hole.
So that plug at the bottom is the center line. Got you.
That's the line
It may seem unimportant to you, but this attention to detail at every step of the gunmaking process is indicative of the overall quality of the gun.
Surprise. It's a little set in the height.
Yeah.
But that's not bad because the screw is 1.5 millimeters smaller.
So you have the tolerance.
Before we left, Ed wanted to run through a few bits with Ralph to do with a new stock that will be going with his new Pro Rib barrel.
You going to be moving to the Pro Rib or just trying it out for a
I
bit?
like it. Because I mount low in the shoulder, and over the last one, don't shoot very much now, but when I have picked my clay gun up, just found that my head wants to come away a little bit. I can keep a little bit more upright.
So now we've seen how they're built, let's head to the shooting ground and see what the end product is all about.
This shooting ground didn't seem much on the outside, but we walked in,
They've got plenty to play with, so yeah, let's get stuck in.
I'm looking forward to it. All 4 models of K80.
Yes.
Well, we've got 4 models of K80.
Yeah, there's more than that, but we're going to look at the Parkours, the Parkours X, what we call the Super Sport, which is the K80 sporting spec, and also the Pro Rib, so the raised adjustable rib. And yeah, we'll just talk through some of the different points, see how they shoot. Let's go and have a go.
They like a lot of targets on our layout here.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff crammed into a fairly small space here, so it's going to be interesting to see what we've got.
The parkour.
Yes, so this is where we're going to be starting for you. It's an interesting side note. It's important for people to understand that all of the Krieghoff series of shotguns are actually based on the same action. So for all the different specs and handling differences that you've got, they are all based around a tried and trusted K80 action, which is pretty much bomb-proof, which is great.
You haven't broken one.
Not yet. This is the Parkour spec. This is the lightest, fastest handling of the shotguns that Krieghoff make.
Is it a game gun?
Yeah, it was kind of more designed to start off being like a driven game gun, but as you know, there's plenty of people that shoot them to an incredibly high level at clays as well as game. It doesn't have the traditional K80 look. This doesn't have the barrel hanger system. This is like a mid-rib gun, which on the face of it, you would think would make the gun handle sort of slower and steadier because you look at it and go, well, there's got to be more metal there. It's actually the opposite. They've managed to brace the barrels with the mid-rib, which means they can take some weight out of the barrels, some sort of meat out of the metal. So it actually is a much lighter, much faster handling gun. This is also in 30-inch, which will add to that. Different to the K80 spec rib, you see you've got a complete, truly flat rib here as opposed to the semi-raised rib that K80's got. That also means they can take a little bit of weight away from it. Generally speaking, just a very responsive, fast-moving gun.
You're losing a bit of stock weight there as well, I guess, because it's not having to be so high.
So they actually developed the Parkour's woodwork in conjunction with the Parkour's barrels.
Makes a lot of sense,
Yep,
doesn't it?
absolutely. In the UK, this now comes as standard on K80 and Parkour's setups, and because it's got an adjustable comb, you can raise it for the slightly higher rib on the K80. And it works really well. It's a lot slimmer and lighter weight, less chunky than the original K80 stocks, and that again takes weight down, and standard weight, depending on wood density, is kind of around the 8 pound 4 mark.
It's an interesting thing with the K80 where you've got such a lot of metal in the middle. These barrels and the total overall weight of this gun isn't low, but it handles like a 7.6 gun.
This is going to be super fast compared to what we're shooting. And that's added with the fact that it's a 30-inch as opposed to a 32. It's going to be interesting handling. This would be the sort of thing where if you're going to do a lot of grouse shooting, this would be perfect. Or doing walked up and stuff. There's not too many people that shoot 30-inch Parkours for clays. There's no reason why you can't. It's just that they'll be
It's not the best tool of the range, right?
Arguably too fast for that, but as a tool for walked up game shooting and sort of shorter, faster moves, yeah, perfect. Do you want to give it a go?
It is unbelievably fast.
It's just going to be something where if you're used to shooting a heavier spec gun, sort of heavier set of barrels, this spec will probably not be for you.
Yeah.
But there's plenty of applications where this is going to be perfect.
Average pheasants, average partridge,
absolutely.
normal
You see
shooting.
so many of them on driven days. On the high stuff as well, being double gunning, having a pair of them cycling through a big day.
Yeah.
You don't want your arms dropping off.
I mean, it's not that it's a bad thing, but I don't think that Parkour would be for me.
That's not the spec that I would look at setting up for you. And the thing that you would have to bear in mind, obviously this is standard spec wood, standard spec barrels. You're someone where a standard sort of spec stock
Isn't
would
perfect,
not be
right?
correct. You're going to need more wood at the back, which is then going to have the effect of making it more back heavy, more lively at the front, which will then make it even faster.
Yeah.
So this is not a Johnny Carter gun.
No, but I'm very instinctive. That sea target, the rabbit, crunched it in between the logs.
Yeah.
Felt very, very fast, very instinctive with it.
If you were sat in a hide and birds were coming over, perfect, right?
Your turn.
So this will be interesting because this is actually the first time I've shot a Parkour's X. I've handled them, but I've not pulled the trigger on them. So even though this is considerably heavier in the barrel and slower than the Parkour's that you've just shot, because I've come from shooting a very heavy barreled pro rib, as you do, I have to actively back myself down to not push through stuff.
Yeah.
Because that's so easy for me, having muscle memory built up with a big heavy gun. That to me feels much more natural to shoot than the Parkour's. So the Parkour's X kind of sits halfway between the Parkour's barrels and the K80. So
This is a sporting gun.
yeah, it's kind of like a hybrid, right? It's still got the traditional flat rib. So the spec of the stock that works for a Parkour's will work for a Parkour's X. You don't need to adjust the comb.
Yep.
It's got a thicker rib and it's just got more meat in the barrel. So it's a slower, more deliberate handling gun compared to the Parkour's.
It's an interesting thing, right? And you get it with some other brands where they have a consistent action and they'll say, I don't like a K80. And you're like, how many have you shot?
And it's kind of a broad church, right? You can't say you don't like a K80 because there's so many options available to you to shoot.
Yeah, and I've shot specs that I just don't like.
As have I. Look, I can pick up a 30-inch Parkour's, which I've not shot, but I can tell you now, I will find that incredibly difficult because it will not shoot my style and method of shooting. It's not to say it's wrong, and there's plenty of people. Mark Windsor shoots a standard 32-inch Parkour's, and he shoots it incredibly well. So you can't say that a Parkour's is too fast. The Parkour's is just fast enough for Mark, but it'd be too fast for me.
Yeah.
Martin Myers shoots a Super Sport, 32-inch.
About finding something that's just right for you.
You've
and
got
I think
to
that's
find
certainly
what works, right?
That's always tough in the second-hand market as well, is that you kind of don't have that choice.
Yeah, I mean, there's always going to be various specifications available, right? But you've got to understand going into it what you're looking for. So if you're someone that wants a heavier, slower moving, more deliberate gun, you're instantly going to be looking more towards the K80 Sporting 32-inch, possibly a Pro Rib, depending on your fit sort of desires, really. If you're someone who's going to be shooting lots of game or prefers and shoots a faster gun well, then you'll be looking more at the Parkours and the Parkours X.
What I found fascinating yesterday, and this is completely aside and nothing to do with what we're talking about, is they do a long trigger and a short trigger.
Yeah.
And it just is, there is so much variety around one action that I think it is it's a minefield, right?
Yeah, I mean, just as an example, so if Sash comes in on here, I've got reasonably long hands. Mm-hmm. So this is the standard rear position trigger, and it's got some adjustment on it, so you can move it forwards and backwards 5, 6, 7 mil by the look of it. So you've got adjustability. But if you look at where this sits on my hand, that's clearly way too short. So on my gun, which is an option you can have, you have a forward position trigger, which gives you an additional 10 mil of adjustment. So for somebody like myself or you who has got long hands, long fingers, that's a simple change, because this feels like super, super uncomfortable for me because I'm all bunched up at the back of the gun. Changing the trigger completely changes the feel, right? Okay, so now we're starting to come into a little bit more Johnny Carter friendly territory, I would say.
This is what people think of when they think of a K80.
Yeah, if you just said somebody, draw a K80, it's this, right? Split barrels, hanger, very, very obvious to see what it is from a distance, right? Much, much heavier barrels than what we've just shot with both the Parkours and the Parkours X. And you'll notice visually this is very different. You've got the two separate floating barrels, which is a very, very unique look. Mm-hmm. Hanger at the front, which can adjust point of impact, which you will talk about a little bit more in detail later. Because you don't have a mid-rib, the barrels themselves are much thicker for strength. Obviously, thicker barrels, more metal, more weight. This is a much, much steadier, slower handling, more deliberate gun, which I think will suit you, and certainly suits me, much better than the lighter barrel specs. Yeah. Slightly different rib setup, so you've got a semi-raised rib. So this is an interesting point. If people think of having a set of Parkours barrels and a set of Sporting barrels, you can have them fitted to the same action, but the two will need different stock specs. Yeah. Because one has got a slightly raised rib. Obviously the cast and everything can stay the same, but you want to have two settings on your stock, one probably another at 5 or 6 mil higher.
Yeah, and then the thing with gun fit, right, is it's cause and effect. If you just move that comb up, it's going to need perhaps some things. So 2 wood sets potentially, or...
This is the more traditional K80 Sporting stock. This is a little bit chunkier, so there's a little bit more weight in the back of the gun, which helps balance the heavier barrels. But I think you shooting this will feel much more at home for you and much more controllable.
We're now at like £9.
Yeah, you'll be around the £9 mark.
Yeah, that'll do.
So just having a few shots through that, you can instantly feel the difference in handling, and it's not to say one's better than the other, but that is a specification that will clearly suit you more than the first two we've shot, right?
Right, there's a requirement almost to actually swing a gun in a polite fashion with the Parkour, whereas this you can just go, you're dead there, bang.
You can shoot that a little bit more naturally for you. Yeah. You're not going to have to actively try and hold yourself back.
I like it.
Yeah.
I mean, it's very familiar, right? It's the same as what you've got, more or less.
You've shot this basic spec a lot of times with me, right? You've got the titanium chokes, the titanium hanger on the front. You've seen they just pattern super, super well. You hit stuff very, very hard with them.
It helps pointing it in the right direction,
that
of course.
Obviously
like,
is
not
a big
just taking
part
the edges off.
That's a big part of the gig, which we haven't quite mastered yet, but we've got a good excuse from that off of last night, haven't we? So yeah, it's just interesting to find something that you can now pick up and go, okay, this is much more like it for me, and it gives you a starting point to then start, look at building a gun around what you understand and what you want, rather than just going, that looks cool, I'll have a shot with that.
You're spending a lot of money when you're buying a Krieghoff. They are not a cheap gun.
Yep.
It's probably wise to spend an afternoon trying them.
Take the time to understand what the options are, what you want, what you're going to be doing more of. There's about 15, 20 different options when you look at stock specs, barrel specs, fit, all of this kind of stuff. You can't just say, I've shot a K80 and I didn't like it. You might have not liked that one, because it used to be, it was the K80 or it was nothing. Okay, so if you wanted to shoot a Krieghoff, you had to shoot a K80. They were fairly heavy, they were fairly slow to move. Again, not a criticism, but they will suit certain people well and certain people will struggle. Now, you have all of the bases covered. You have different head positions, different barrel weights, different specifications that pretty much cover every single option. So you can find a Krieghoff that works for you rather than just saying generically, I can't shoot that gun. Because it's a bit of a ridiculous blanket statement.
Last but not least, the Pro Rib.
Yes, so this has actually got my stock on it. You see it's been adjusted a bit because it's higher. I don't shoot a lot of clays. The last couple of times I've been out, I've actually shot the Pro 1 Challenge, and I shot it with a Pro Rib and really, really enjoyed it. We've got a 30-inch Pro Rib here, so this is K80 barrels, but we've actually got an adjustable top rib. So when you combine the adjustable top rib, which you can change for point of impact, with the fact you've got interchangeable hangers, you can kind of adjust the life out of this. You can make this do what you want. For people like you and me, who have got pretty long necks, fairly high cheekbones, this higher head-up position, I think works really well, and it feels super comfortable for me.
Yeah, and you like seeing a lot of rib, right? So you could actually really tune your point of impact.
So if I want to, I can set this up and see loads of rib, but it doesn't necessarily have to shoot super high. So I can adjust the end of the rib to correct the fact that I'm seeing lots of it, and it doesn't necessarily mean it sends the pattern completely high. Yeah. I always shoot a reasonably high shooting gun, but again, this gives you the ability to tune what you're doing based on your requirements.
We had a lot of fun with this gun yesterday at the indoor shooting range.
Yes. Not bad for a left-handed gun.
The gun fit does matter quite a lot, but sometimes apparently.
So clearly not there.
Built-in cast. I didn't think I was going to like it that much, but it's really good.
I think if we had this in 32-inch and you didn't have to put up with my left-handed stock,
that was suboptimal.
Which is not ideal for you. I think anyone would agree that. I think you could have a absolute ball with this.
It's not the one I'd pick out the rack, but again, doesn't matter, right? It clearly would pick me out of the rack, and that's probably
your objective
here. Put that aside,
is to try and break as many clays as you possibly can, right? And you want to try and choose a gun that suits what you're doing, how you're built, rather than just, oh, I like the look of that one.
Yeah, because I think the Parkor's the more classic looking of the lot.
For sure. If you were to say you want to go on a game shoot, you'd probably want to be picking the Parkors up, right? But for me, it's about what you're comfortable with and how you hit targets, and that's kind of black and white.
Yeah, right. Thank you very much.
Pleasure.
This factory tour was an amazing experience. A cursory glance at the championships they have won should be enough for anyone to understand that Krieghoff make a serious gun. Getting to know their users and finally spending a few days seeing the love, care and attention that goes into making these guns and rifles has cemented that Krieghoff really do deserve their top tier spot in gunmaking. And I look forward to getting back there one day to see more, learn more and have more fun. My thanks to Ed, Ralph and Sash for making this trip so memorable. And thanks to you for watching, guys. We'll see you on the next adventure.